Welcome to the Gospel Liberty Podcast. Thank you for joining us for another episode. John Piper describes what it was like after 4 months of very deeply studying Romans 9 in the fall of 1979. He says that after that study, he knew that God will be heralded and not just analyzed or explained. So once again, he said that what the Lord wants is for him to be proclaimed and heralded, not just analyzed and explained. So heralded is a proclamation. It's not just a proclamation of just facts, but it is a praise. It's a exulting in, it's a taking joy in, it's an announcement of news, not just analyzing and explaining something and dishing out facts. And one more quote here, and then I want us to discuss this here. This ties in very closely to Albert Einstein. And you might ask how. Well, Piper would regularly mention this quote in his preaching, and I believe he still does to this day. But there was a person named Meisner, Charles Meisner, who talked about the attitude of Albert Einstein toward organized religion and preaching. And he said this about 50 years ago. So Meisner said this about Albert Einstein. I do see the design of the universe has essentially a religious question that is one should have some kind of respect and awe for the whole business. It's very magnificent and shouldn't be taken for granted. In fact, I believe that is why Einstein had so little use for organized religion, although he strikes me as a basically very religious man. He must have looked at what their preachers said about God and felt that they were blaspheming. Einstein had seen much more majesty than they had ever imagined, and they were just not talking about the real thing. My guess is that he simply felt that religions he had run across did not have a proper respect for the author of the universe, end quote. And Piper says, I was so cut at reading that I pledged to God to redouble my efforts not to ever have anybody be able to say that about me. And I want to speak so tonight, he said. This was back in 1997, I believe. And I want to speak so tonight as to cut preachers and inspiring preachers and those who form search committees and call of preachers so as to want never to have that said of any preachers, of anybody.
Amen.
That they're just, their view of God is so small. That people who study the stars and study quantum physics and all of this amazing stuff, they can see how amazing the universe is. But when we preach, when we speak about God, are we just are we getting at who he really is? Or are we just speaking about little facts and little things and we're just boring people? We're not doing justice to who he really is if we don't explain him in his beauty, in his justice, in his power, in his supremacy in all things.
Oh, amen. Oh, man. Well, I have so many thoughts. I mean, I think that both of those quotes are just incredible. I mean, I think that the first one, I just really think that so often, preachers just think that they're professors.
Yes.
They just think that they're out there just writing some lecture.
Distributing facts. And that is not okay. And I think that it's also, even with the second one and, for Piper to call out so many of those things, he's a preacher and yet he's ripping. He is absolutely ripping on other preachers. Yes.
And yet that's good. So often, lay people or other pastors, you might hear you and I or other people and think, oh, you should never speak ill of pastors. Oh, that's just a dangerous road to go down. But even John Piper himself is literally rebuking these other pastors,
yes,
calling out the, terrible, ways that they, just
speak about
take
God.
it so lightly, and you may even just make jokes on, all day, or just completely just treat it like it's some lecture. Here's a bunch of facts. Okay, here's the text. Well, I exposited it faithfully because I gave you all the facts. Well, that you just literally did nothing to stir my affections for Christ at all. And I think that, there's just, I have so many thoughts, but what do you think?
Which, Jonathan Edwards rightly mentioned, that's one of the main duties of preachers is to stir the affections from the truth, not just whip people up into a frenzy that isn't
just
based
this
on anything real. Right,
No,
exactly.
amen.
But to the degree it has to be, when you're speaking about the greatest reality in the universe, Jesus Christ himself, the most beautiful one, the most just one, if you aren't seeking to help people's affections to be raised to the proper degree that they should be, then you're doing something in ingratitude. It's like going to a basketball game. Imagine you see Michael Jordan in his prime in person, and you're, an amazing Chicago Bulls fan, and for the first time ever, you get to see Michael Jordan in person, and he scores 45 points, and he had, 4 slam dunks, and he hit the game-winning shot, and then you go home to the next day and you see your buddy at work and he says, "How was the game?" And you just, in a monotone voice, you say, "Michael Jordan had 45 points. He was 18 for 24 from the field. He made a game-winning shot at the buzzer." Are you saying anything wrong? You're not saying anything false. You're teaching what's right.
No, here's
you're
the facts.
You're explaining what happened
Totally.
at the game. But it's like, wait, what? Your emotions and the way you're explaining it doesn't match the majesty of what just occurred. You should be explaining it with passion, with poetry, explaining the majesty and the beauty of, you just got to see the greatest player who ever played the game do his thing, and the crowd was going nuts, baby. And then he crossed this guy over and he swished it from deep and he hit the game winner where people were going nuts. And, that's how you should be. And those two things are the same as far as the facts that they're communicating, but yet one of them matches reality in a greater way, and it exalts the beauty of the situation. And you can say the same thing about a concert. You went to a concert and you heard Mozart play, and you just say, "Yep." Then he pushed this key, and then he did this, and then he did what? No, explain it in a poetically beautiful way with your passions being stirred up
to describe the situation.
Yes.
Again, the Lord created adjectives for a reason, and Piper talks so much about English and literature and writing and verbs and adjectives. He writes poetry himself. He writes poetry himself. He's an excellent writer, and yet he even communicates about his writing or about writing in general in the way that he preaches. And it's just it is extremely necessary for these moments. Again, these pastors, you are up there every single Lord's Day, week in and week out. Don't waste it.
Amen.
Don't just stand up there and waste it. You are a pastor. Okay, well then work your butt off, prepare your sermon, and be prayerful that the Lord would help you. But I just think that so often, pastors don't take it very seriously, and they just think, oh, it's just okay. I got to come up with a 30-minute sermon. How am I going to get the people's attention? Come up with some story to begin, and then,
some funny joke or something.
Exposit the text a little bit and then close it. Okay, well, you didn't do anything for my affections for the Lord.
And that's one piece of it, certainly. Are they taking it seriously? Another key piece of it that I think is so often missing is, are they passionately affected by Christ and his glory and the triune God and his work themselves?
Amen. You can't force it. That was exactly my other point that I was going to say too. You cannot force it. So then all of a sudden your history of your preaching, you can't just flip a switch. You need to be
enthralled with the Lord.
You need to be absolutely, completely treasuring Christ and exactly, enthralled with the Lord, just loving his word, loving all of these things. It's not just something that can just change overnight.
Yes.
And that's why, there's only few men that should be, really called to full-time ministry. So many, this is just going into another conversation that we don't need to have, but I just think that it's I just think that it's a beautiful blessing to have Piper and so many other gifted preachers who actually seem like they treasure Christ, and they are very passionate about his word and about making him look
the way he is,
the way that he is, and
Yes.
to truly give him the glory. And, in all of the descriptions and the applications and the expository language is all culminating to look how amazing God is.
Yes. Amen. Yeah. And that's what we need to be aiming for. Like, imagine if even a better analogy than the Michael Jordan one is the woman that you love, and someone asks you who doesn't know your wife, describe your wife. Tell me about your wife. And you just very calmly say, she has brown eyes. She's 5'6". She likes to cook, and she likes to do bird watching. And then you just like, okay, did you say, maybe you're saying a bunch of true things, but you're not really showing that you are amazed at her and that you love her, and what, drew your affections for her. And is she just someone that you live with, and that, oh, she's my wife, and you're just describing her and you're saying a bunch of true facts about her in this boring way? No, you should be telling, oh, she's so incredible. She does this. She's like this. She's amazing. I love her so much. This is why she's so great. And that is what glorifies your wife. Mm-hmm. And that's, even more so, we should be thinking about, okay, how is the Lord amazing? What is amazing about the Lord? And when I step into this pulpit, that is such an incredibly high calling.
Very heavy.
You should be thinking, Lord, help me to taste the weightiness of what I'm about to do. Yes. Help me, because I cannot do this on my own. I cannot show these people a sliver of what you are really like without your help. Help me to taste it. Help me to taste who you are in your justice, in your might, in your knowledge, in your power, in your kindness, in your patience, in your humility, in all of your attributes. And then to, like Piper has said, set a feast of Christ before you, that you might be satisfied, that you might eat and drink and be satisfied in him as you are listening and participating in the sermon, by being an active listener and a joyful consumer of all that Christ is for you, because that's what he's doing. He's here to serve you, and you consume him. You eat Christ. You drink Christ during the sermon, especially, but all throughout the week, obviously too. But this is the task. And we blaspheme Christ when we step into the pulpit. It's like, what are we even doing here? Why are we this is God, the one who created you, who's giving you church. You're not just playing games. Yeah. He's the one who is giving you breath in your lungs. He's the one who's giving you sight. He is the one who is causing natural disasters. We're just reading Lamentations. And what does it say? It says, does disaster come to a city unless the Lord has done it? Is it not from the Most High that both good and bad come? Amen. These things are, that's deep. Yeah. That's powerful. How does that make you feel? What does that make you think? That God is the one who's controlling the winds and the waves, and he is controlling armies and kings, and he is controlling his angels with the word of his power, and he's causing babies to be born, and he is bringing people from the dead spiritually all the time by the word of his power. This is the Lord that you are called to exalt, the Lord that is, created the smallest atom, the smallest molecule in the universe, to the thousands of galaxies, trillions of miles away. This is the God that you are called to step in and exalt, and the Lord who stepped into the universe in the person of Jesus Christ, fully God and fully man, to redeem us from our sin. That God came to rescue us and to bring us to himself, to transform his creation, and so that we can live with him forever in the glorified new earth. This is the Lord that you're called to exalt, not just you step into the pulpit to get another, it's another week, another paycheck, and maybe the people will take a small fact about what happened in the ancient Near East. That's not what you're called to do.
No, for sure. And I mean, yeah, I think that the people that are under your care, that you're, preaching to week in, week out, whatever, the people need more of this, beautiful, just passion. It's not just, you think, oh, I wonder how my sermon was. Well, it's probably not very good if you aren't being passionate.
Yes.
And if you're not saying things that are going to stir people on to treasure the Lord, if you're not applying, anything to the people's lives. I mean, look at all the people. Everyone is at different stages in their walk with the Lord, So, I mean, just take the most immature person in the congregation. Well, how are you going to help them?
Yes.
It's just, it's very, very... Oh man, it's just so sad and it's so heavy because it cheapens God.
Yes.
It really just makes Christianity cheap and just weak and just, it just is like some joke.
Yep.
You go in, you do your thing. Okay, you're done for the week. Okay, see you next Lord's Day. But then it's like, okay, well, we need to you need to glorify Christ. The people need to be fed.
Yes.
How are we going to go out the week, treasuring the Lord more? I mean, what's the game plan here? When you just sit under just dry preaching is just very, very sad. And, again, we don't, endorse, every single thing about Piper,
right.
But this specifically, you and I will come back to again and again and again, that it is some beautiful gift, that the Lord has allowed, us to learn so much from Piper and to be able to, hear and
this is one of the most
be
important
encouraged
things.
in so much of this preaching. Yes, amen.
Yeah. This isn't just some secondary thing. I mean, this is one of the most important things. Since these things are real,
mm-hmm.
we cannot mess around. Mm-hmm. We cannot take these things lightly. There is a real hell. Mm-hmm. that people are going to go to if they do not trust Christ.
Amen.
There's a real place right now of suffering and waiting for judgment, that thousands of people are dying without Christ. There is a real God who is intimately involved in his creation, mm-hmm. who is causing every single one of your beats to happen in your heart.
Yes.
And he is controlling all things. And he is active and he's on the move. And mm-hmm. and you are here. You can think, you can talk, you can move. And the Lord created you for a very distinct purpose. These things, we're not just messing around. Mm-hmm. And back to this Meisner quote, this is so important. Albert Einstein had seen much more majesty than these preachers had ever imagined, and they were just not talking about the real thing. My guess, Meisner says, is that Einstein simply felt that religions he had run across did not have a proper respect for the author of the universe. Can someone who's a physicist or someone who studies science deeply in anything, mm-hmm. who comes to listen to your sermon, and maybe he's agnostic and he says, oh yeah, I'm just trying to check out this Christian thing, because I've seen so many things I can't explain in the natural world with mm-hmm. how amazing all these things are and the order and the beauty of it all. And then he goes and he sits and listens to your sermon. What is he going to think? Is he going to think that you have a proper understanding of who this God is that created everything, that's governing everything? Or is he just going to think this is some joke? I'm just going to go look for it elsewhere.
Exactly.
No, that is the task of preachers, one of the many tasks. But one of the key ones is to show the majesty of who Christ is in all of his glory and all of his power. So may the Lord help us all to encourage our pastors. Maybe, a way you can do it, if you are, think, I wish that my pastor could hear this. Well, send him a sermon of Piper explaining these things. Or, have a kind conversation with him, explaining these things. Oh yeah, I just, been learning more about the passion that we should have and the truth of who the Lord is. There's an amazing John Piper sermon jam on the supremacy of Christ.
Yes.
That I think it's about 18 minutes long, and he's just explaining the attributes of Christ and how he's more wonderful than anything else. And send that to your pastor and pray that the Lord will stir him up to preach Christ in this passionately beautiful way, because it's so necessary.
Amen. I know one more thing before we end, but I always just I often want to think, how often do other pastors listen to Piper? I really do think that the more people and all Christians, the more you can listen to Piper and how he preaches and how he, does his thing.
It's contagious.
It is contagious, and it is very, very helpful for Christians, lay people and, pastors, alike, because I think that people's eyes and hearts will be opened to truly see the beautiful glories of the Lord.
So preachers, show us Christ. Show us his beauty, his justice, his majesty, his power, his love, his infinite knowledge, his unsearchable kindness, the riches of his grace. Show us Christ and help us to see what he is really like, and that he controls the every virus, every bacteria. He controls every single blade of grass growing, the every sunrise, the temperature, the dew point, armies, the heart of kings and presidents and prime ministers and congresspeople and results of elections, and show us this Christ on a week in and week out basis, that we might behold him in all of his glory and be satisfied in his amazing grace. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Gospel Liberty Podcast.